Welcome to the Federal Ministry of Environment, the Green Building, for this ministerial press briefing on the activation of the safe post-COVID reopening of our schools. The federal government of Nigeria, through the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, has decided to reopen schools which have remained closed since February as a measure to contain the spread of the coronavirus disease in the country. The schools reopening, however, is to be done in strict compliance with the directives of the PTF and based on the guidelines for safe opening of schools issued by the federal government under PTF, being a major COVID-19 containment protocol. In the last few months, the Federal Ministry of Environment and that of the Education have been collaborating to put in place necessary safeguards for safe operation of our learning environment. The protection of the health of learners and their caregivers is very crucial. This saw to the decontamination, disinfection by our Federal Ministry of Environment of the federal colleges, or rather unity schools, and the deployment of 40,000 environmental emergency volunteer corps to man environmental health surveillance desks and enforce the COVID-19 protocol issued by PTF at the centers during the WAEC Senior School Certificate examination. The interim report showed that the project was a huge success. In furtherance of the collaboration, our ministry is also working to realize the objectives of the Federal Ministry of Education's guidelines on safe opening of schools and learning facilities. The guidelines has substantiated roles of education stakeholders regarding the process, risk mitigation and safety assurance. As a major stakeholder in this, the Ministry of Environment is set to play its role in the entire chain of events. Accordingly, the environmental health officers, the environmental health emergency volunteer corps will be utilized as was done previously based on the outcome of their performance in the examination center's surveillance. This time around, we shall be activating 60,000 of such volunteers to cover schools in all the 774 local government in the Federation. The 60,000 environmental health volunteers will be working with other stakeholders at the subnational level in accordance with the guidelines for the safe opening of schools. The roles of the environment sector generally and specifically that of the environmental health practitioners includes participating in developing detailed protocols, established and maintaining prescribed hygiene standards and practices, including water, sanitation and hygiene, that is wash provisions, additional measures of temperature checks and screening, hand hygiene, access to adequate gender segregated toilet facilities, adequately ventilated classrooms and hostels accommodation, use of face masks, proper hygiene, proper food preparation and handling using the protocol, as well as disposal of water waste also apply. Furthermore, it is the duty of the environmental health officers to prioritize the immediate setting up of school environmental health clubs where none existed prior to COVID-19 pandemic, and as well resuscitate those not properly functioning. These clubs, essentially run by selected learners, would help in implementing directives of the teacher-driven school hygiene committees. It is also appropriate to advise school managers to introduce hygiene and sanitation prefect sheet to ensure proper compliance and daily guidance of learners. In the same vein, environmental health officers working in the state and local governments are hereby directed to key in to the training of teachers, administrators, and other education personnel on safe and hygiene measures, namely disinfection, safe distancing, hand hygiene, use of face masks and shield, noting that the use of just shield is not acceptable, but you can combine shield and face mask, respiratory hygiene and waste management as well. They will also play a vital role in the development of information, education and communication materials on hygiene and sanitation for use around the premises and in classrooms. Environmental health officers should also see to the provision of safe and hygienic school feeding arrangement and facilities, as food hygiene is paramount in the safe school operation, with particular attention to safe distancing in cafeterias. Equally important is the environmental health officers to ensure food handlers and vendors in schools are regularly monitored for conformity with hygienic practices and behavior while feeding learners from farm to fork. Let me strongly advocate that on account of the need to ensure that safety, health and well-being of both learners and caregivers are maintained, licensed environmental health officers should be engaged by school proprietors who will be responsible for WASH programs and activities in the school, including regular and routine sanitary inspection of premises. Where the schools individually do not have financial capacity, a cluster of 3 or more schools could engage one on a retainership. Similarly, for schools wishing to to outsource terminal and concurrent decontamination and disinfection, they are enjoined to adhere to the provisions of the National Environmental Health Practice Regulations 2016 by engaging only one person and firms licensed by the Environmental Health Officers Registration Council of Nigeria for the safety and healthful living of learners and teachers, as only decontamination certificates issued by licensed professionals will be entertained and considered valid nationwide. Furthermore, in accordance with the guidelines, environmental health officers in the federal and state Ministry of Environment, as well as those in local government environmental health departments, shall be part of the joint assessment team for safe reopening of schools and learning facilities, being part of the authorized assessors. Let me also reiterate that the ministry will monitor compliance with prescribed standards through a network of monitoring and evaluation teams across the nation. Additionally, environmental health departments at all national levels are hereby directed to work collaboratively and with the respective education ministries and departments in order to succeed. Thank you for listening. Why it's suggested that a cluster of schools, be it 3 or 4, that can hire one licensed environmental health officer or a firm that is licensed. Regardless of the financial capacity, there must be this licensed environmental health officers, because which one is more expensive? Just defaulting and having hundreds of children getting infected with coronavirus, or doing whatever possible to get. So now, will there be sanction? Definitely. Any program or enforcement that has no sanction is just as good as not even instituting it. So there is sanction, and that is provided in the health regulation that I just mentioned. Definitely there will be sanction, definitely. Will environmental health volunteers be trained? Yes, actually we have already trained a large number, and I believe the Heracon will probably, as the need arises, will seek and train more. In addition to training brand new volunteers, also we do have, of course, the retired ones that were called back into action and that were willing to come back and contribute This is a crisis in the nation, and we need everybody's hand on deck. So yes, volunteers will be trained. If you want to be one of them, we'll be happy to train you. Thank you. Okay, as it was mentioned previously, we trained, actually, we first recall the retired ones, and then we trained 3,000, and then another 3,000. Up to the tune of, during the examination, we were able to deploy 40,000, now 60,000. So we are escalating the response as the need arises. By the time we come to open every single institution in the country, we will do the same thing. We will up the number, just as she was asking if we can train. So this is continuous. It's being monitored continuously. Wherever we used to have like 2 officers, let's say at local government, and then during the pandemic, we upped that to 4, and in some places more than that. So this is based on the response, what we see and what we need to do.
Well, thank you very much. You know, today is another landmark achievement made by the Federal Ministry of Environment under the leadership of Dr. Mohammed Mahmoud Abubakar. The ministry, which is the major stakeholders as far as the reopening is concerned, is deploying 60,000 volunteers to mount surveillance desks in the 774 local government schools. Going back to your question, you know the federal government has a rolling plan on easing down the lockdown, and is stage by stage. If you recall, the federal government opened up the 19,000 examination centers for WAEC. Now, the secondary school is being gradually, as directed by the PTF, been opening. So it's a gradual process. So other learning institutions too are part of Nigeria, and I believe the federal government is making effort to gradually open up so that at least the guideline issued will be released intermittently as the lockdown is being eased out.
Okay, is there a timeline for this particular exercise?
Yes, there is a timeline, though it's a continuous process, provided there is COVID-19. The environmental health volunteers are going to continue mounting the surveillance decks and also making sure that the protocol guideline issued by the PTF is adhered to by all learning centers or learning institutions in the country. So it's a continuous process. Yeah.